Hi, and welcome everybody to Light on the Horizon, Fridays for Earth. This is an inspiration of Chantal Burns and myself and Jenny Anderson and Dave Elleray, who are on the line now. And we just got together with all of us with thinking about the ecological and climate crisis that we're in. And since we all come from a three principles spiritual psychology background, it just made sense. Let's just put them together and see what happens. And that's what we're doing here. So we've come up with some topics. And if you want to go back, like the first webinar has a slideshow presentation on the state of the crisis at this point, which I have felt is important for people, especially healers, to be acquainted with as they're encountering others who are going through climate anxiety and despair or grief or all these different emotions that people are having, so that people can feel that healers are trustworthy in their understanding of the situation now, even if the healer might be optimistic or pessimistic about outcomes. That's not the point. The point is to help people with their mental health and their well-being, regardless. And then we also have there's a presentation on the principles on the second webinar. If you're interested in that, we may not go over that again today, but you'll hear the flavor of the principles throughout, and you'll just get a sense of it. And it's fine; you don't need to have the full background if you're not a three principles person to begin with. It'll just start to make sense to you. But if you want to go back and get the dictionary definitions in terms of the three principles world, then you can go back to the second webinar. And so today our topic is beyond burnout and creating a regenerative culture, atmosphere, or resources for activists and organizers and leaders who maybe, you know, it's I've noticed, because I'm an XR coordinator in Santa Cruz, that there's a tendency to want to always be active because it's such an overwhelming situation. So you look out at the planet and you're getting news reports about the whales are dying, you know, the kelp beds are dying, the bees are dying, everything's, you know, feels like dying, and you just want to stop it as quickly as possible. And so there's a tendency to be in a lot of future thinking, if that makes sense, like a tremendous amount. We don't know how many insects have died. We don't know exactly what's going on everywhere, but we're getting a lot of negative reports. And it's easy to envision a lot of catastrophe in the future. And to some extent, you know, planning is wise. I'm not opposed to planning, and I'm not opposed to planning for what may start to seem inevitable. In fact, that may be necessary. But to continue to be in a doomsday scenario in one's mind can be, it takes us out of the present moment, which is where our wisdom lies, and our best ideas, our creativity, our insight, and our simple joy of living today. So to bring these two worlds together seems so essential to me. The activist community running around very busy, you know, kind of thing, or just even people experiencing a lot of anxiety around the climate. And this idea that if we can connect to our sense of presence or our true selves, we will be moved in the best way, or not moved. Perhaps it's time to stop moving. You know, Kimberly was just talking about that on a blog she wrote, and I'd love to hear from Kimberly, because she just was at the Deep Adaptation Forum with Jem Bendell for 4 days, and she says he's called the rock star of doomerism. Do you want to fill us in on that? And then,
Doomosphere, rock star of the Doomosphere.
Yeah.
He's actually not like that at all. He's very, actually very joyful. And I think that was the biggest thing that for me with that 4 days was feeling the last 2 months for me have been a roller coaster of emotions, including very, very deep grief. But what seemed to happen, and it partly as a result of those 4 days and partly other things, is I'm kind of beginning to glimpse what's on the other side of that. Once you really allow yourself to look into that abyss and go there and feel it, there's something very beautiful on the other side. So yeah, right now I am very peaceful, very, it's living, it's kind of how can we live well in these times? How can we really live well and together in community in these times? So since coming back, I've got lots of ideas, including local community wisdom councils and all sorts of things. But it's feeling really, it doesn't feel urgent or tight or tense anymore. For now, that may change again, but I'm just kind of getting clearer and clearer about the path that I'm called on. And for me, one of the things I'm very clear about is it's not mitigation anymore for me. So it's not about scrambling back up to the cliff. It's realizing that we've fallen off the cliff. Now, how do we joyfully and lovingly come together in the face of that with grace and wisdom? Yeah, so it was really useful.
I can't hear.
Oh, so that's so cool, Kimberly. Can you hear Chantal? No, Chantal's got a bit of an issue, but anyway, so I'm just gonna go ahead. Can you all hear me? Yeah. So we also have Mahima from Nepal on the line, and I'd love to hear from her. I don't think she's in the midst of the flooding that happened or what, because she's in Kathmandu, but I'd love to hear from her. I just wanted to set up a little bit of context around activism again and what Kimberly was talking about from my world, and then we'll get into dialogue and discussion, which is probably the best part of these webinars. Extinction Rebellion here is growing, and we have now several groups, involved, and a lot of what we're doing is just the wake-up call, like, hello, here, we're acting as if we're on this Titanic boat that's not heading for an iceberg or not going down, whatever your thoughts are about that. And one of the pieces that's become very important to the group is the regenerative piece. So we now have like 20 people on the regenerative culture piece. And that it just strikes me, and it's been striking me for a while now, that the XR model for organizing, it doesn't have to be everyone's thing at all, it's just something I'm seeing, is laying the foundation for what can either be local mitigation or local adaptation, and often they're the same thing. So and these terms might seem unfamiliar to people. We can certainly talk about them, or we can just stay on the topic of activism and burnout, but it's a lot for people to hold. And I've met many young people in town and mothers with young children who really are in a tremendous amount of distress. And in some ways, the activism is helpful because it's like, well, it's better than sitting around doing nothing. But the activism, as Kimberly has experienced, and I've probably experienced too, can also be a way of dispersing our, like, not really dealing with ourselves and our thoughts and emotions. And that doesn't mean that we want to, from a principal's perspective, every emotion is just coming from our thoughts. So it's not like we have to, if we're not having thoughts that are distressful, then there's nothing we have to deal with. It's more the problem of when there are distressing thoughts, and then we're trying to cap it with activism, or not look at it with activism, or go to drinking, or go to something else that's not terribly helpful for us. And it's what a challenge it is to be present at this time for many people, to be present and to My husband and I just went for a walk on the beach up north, and we recently had an event where the mussels had baked in their shells, and mussels are an important part of our food chain. This is not all the mussels, right? But a lot of them just baked to death because of the heat, unusual heat here. And so when my husband and I were walking, I'd forgotten about that story, but there were just thousands of mussel shells all along the beach. And I thought, oh God, this is from the bake off. It was odd to have we were like crunching them as we were walking along. And so it was this strange combination of like, yes, there are these mussel shells, and yes, the mussels have died because of this bake off. And yes, there's still mussels out there, and there's still this beautiful ocean. And my husband and I are still walking along the beach. So I'm just excited to hear from people about how they're holding this dynamic, or if they need help around this dynamic of, sort of looking at what's happening and then also staying grounded, or being active and also staying grounded. And I'd really like to hear from Mahima, because she hasn't joined us before, and we do have some new people. So feel free to, how about if we introduce ourselves and then, present a question or insight, and if you don't want to ask a question, or, just, you don't have to do that, but you might want to introduce yourself if you're new to this webinar series. It'd be great to hear from you. And Mahima, I'm going to unmute you. Anyone can unmute themselves. Wait, I'm trying to unmute her. What's happened? Oh, here we go. There we go. Mahima, can you hear?
Hello.
Hiya.
How are you guys?
Pretty good.
Can you still hear me? Mine says I've been muted. Okay, I've been unmuted. Okay. Hello all. How are you guys? Lovely to see many of you that I haven't seen in ages.
So we'd love to hear from you about what the situation looks like for you in Nepal, and how people are responding or not responding, or how you feel about it all. And because we love you.
Oh,
great to hear from you.
On your calls, Amy. I mean, I feel like, first of all, not adequately informed to comment on at large what the sentiment is in Nepal, but it's a kind of a strange mix, right? On one hand, I mean, things like plastic bags and plastic bag-free zones and campuses and things. I think it was maybe 5-6 years ago that in the city here, you couldn't do shopping and give plastic bags anymore. It was all fabric or paper. And that was like ages ago. So on one hand, some of those things, I think shortcutted a lot of the global deliberation around it, and just got from like using organic old school material to using plastic to like no plastic in a rather short span of time. But at the same time, I think in terms of a national narrative, I mean, at the moment, my big concern, the thing that really, I guess that I have no answers for, just have a ton of questions about, is looking after our own kind of extreme and fragile habitats that we have around here. That includes the mountains, of course, and the mountains are not just for Nepal. It feeds a huge number of rivers in the whole region. There is a fair bit of loss of water and habitat already. And there isn't at the moment an informed political looking at that. So it has tended to be somewhat ad hoc, a mix of activists and some profit motive and some kind of ad hoc lobbying. It's kind of been very, yeah, I guess just ad hoc, without really looking at the bigger picture of how we want to proceed at large. I don't know. I mean, we have a kind of good history of very effective activism, in the sense that we have quite a large number of very small outfits who have successfully reforested huge swaths of land here. I think Nepal is one of the very few big success stories in community-led forest protection and replantation. So, I mean, on one hand, there's a lot of this very good stuff. I think we're also maybe among the very few countries to successfully bring back several species from extinction within quite a short period of time. So there is, a lot of good stuff on the environmental side, but on the human impact on environment, I don't think we have yet begun to look there with the same, what looks from here like a somewhat frenzied reaction, right, in large parts of the world at the moment. But that is something that is a major concern here, that I think we haven't yet started to look at the human impact on environment. While environment in isolation, we have actually really managed to preserve and look after and rebuild huge chunks. I think the human impact, we're still on that development model, where you're thinking more roads is better, more reach of toothpaste to the farthest corners of Nepal is better. We're still on that sort of model at the moment. And there is also there's funding for that. So countries that are very aid driven are often also very aid agenda driven. So there is this kind of paradox of, on one hand, the environmental narrative and how important it is for us to look after it and blah, blah, but at the same time, the same advocates are also funding huge numbers of projects that lead to either sanitary waste or batteries or plastics from like consumer goods in areas where there just weren't before. So I think that's kind of a place where we have a lot of looking to do and to see what are, good solutions, because for sure those places want the progress too. It's easy to, I think, sit in a city and say, well, we shouldn't take things where they weren't before. But there's also the people's sense of perceived progress. So I think we're kind of in that space between straddling these two agendas.
Yeah, I've got the sadness thinking about all the rivers that come from the snow on the mountains, which is now melting away. Like that. As you're talking, I'm just feeling this sadness about that, and thinking about the idea of education.
Mm-hmm.
Because a toothbrush doesn't mean as much when you don't have water. Right? It doesn't mean anything at all.
Developments, I think a couple of years now, 2 or 3 years, there's been several think tanks and several public summits and things which bring together all the countries affected by the Himalayan range, right? So either there are countries in which the Himalayas are present or their rivers are sourced from there. And there's been actually a conflict, a human, nature-driven human conflict agenda that's on the table here, which has brought climate on the forefront, I think, for the last few years in a bigger way than the environmental angle alone would have.
Yeah.
So that's been very helpful here for people to recognize that this is one giant interconnected region fed by a rather fragile ecosystem, and that there isn't a national border in that ecosystem. It kind of affects the whole, like, several continents worth of countries. So that has really actually moved the dialogue further and more at a higher level than the purely environment angle had in many years.
Yeah. Well, we'll see what happens. I hope you have an Extinction Rebellion chapter. That's my personal opinion, or a few. And I noticed Michelle's on the line. We have some new folks, and I'm wanting to be a little more quiet and take a step back. And Michelle, do you want to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about this topic, or if you have any questions? Or I'm going to unmute you now, but you can also unmute yourself at any time. There you go.
All right, and give me a second here, and I'll try to put video on as well. Hey, there, it's working. Hi. Yeah, so I'm sorry I missed the first few minutes, so I'm not really sure what you're looking for an introduction. So I'll just kind of tell people a little bit about myself and my work. My background is actually studying primates in the rainforest. That was my PhD. And after seeing the just incredible loss of habitat, loss of species, the deforestation that's going on all over the tropics, I was really moved to try and work on kind of the bigger problem, because it's very clear when you're working in those places that the deforestation isn't happening because of what's going on locally, it's happening because of what's going on globally. So, you know, being motivated by seeing that kind of loss, I came back as an educator to really work on issues of educating for environmental sustainability in higher ed. And focused on that for about 10 years, and now I'm moving into a little bit more with both sort of, you know, direct activism, getting a little bit involved with Extinction Rebellion and other things like that, but also really understanding that this global crisis at a lot of levels is a moral and spiritual crisis, and working from that. And that's why I started a couple of years ago. And as I look back through my notes, it's like, okay, I started actually writing about this in 2002 and published a few things, but just over the last couple of years, it's developed into this project called Nova Sutras, and that's a big piece of what I'm working on right now.
Hmm.
Oh, uh-oh. I'm not hearing anything now. Oh, I think you're muted, Amy.
Would you be willing to talk about the foundation of that work, what you're seeing as the foundation of what's helpful?
So,
Can I just ask that everyone else mutes themselves if they're not speaking, so we can try and frame out as much of the background noise for the recording as possible. So I think Lars, you need to mute yourself. I think that's everyone. Sorry to interrupt you, Michelle.
so there are a couple of different pieces. Part of the motivation, part of the foundation for that is to have a place for discussion of this that we're currently in. Part of it is to help encourage practices that, you know, there's abundant scientific evidence that these things are good for you, that they strengthen your psychological resilience. So things like mindfulness practices, and simply, you know, being in community, participating in festival and ritual. These things are just really important for humans. It's you know, speaking as an anthropologist, it's what we do is come together in groups and form that kind of community. So there's a lot of power in that.
Thank you. I'm just, I'm feeling like I want to take a step back. So asking Chantal. Dave and Jen might be in too noisy of a space, but Chantal, what do you say? Shall we have new people introduce themselves, or what would you like to do? Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to hear from everyone that is joining for the first time. Well, I mean, we would love to hear from everyone, but particularly it would be really nice to just hear from those of you that are joining for the first time, who you are and why you wanted to be part of the conversation, or whatever you'd like to share. It would be lovely to hear you.
Also, I can just see that Laurie has her hand up, so I didn't know if she had something to share.
Oh, great. Okay. I'm going to mute myself now.
Hi, I like to. I'm from Denmark, and I just got an. I saw this from Mette Louise Holland, who shared this on Facebook, and I just jumped in and liked to see what it was. For 20 years, 25 years ago, I lived in a community which were living ecologically and sustainable, and trying to build our own houses. So I have had this in my mind for many, many years, and when I see polar bears starving and so on because of the conditions now, it really breaks my heart. But in my daily life, I have to just live my life, and I try to speak with people when I have the opportunity, but otherwise I just live a life where I only have second-hand furnitures. I don't use a lot of stuff and so on, and try to figure out how to get my house off grid and so on. But it's a long process. So I have been the kind of guy that always, when I saw a worm on the street, I took it up and took it into the side and so on. So I always felt very connected to animals and all living beings. And but if I go and think about the conditions, always I will get crazy. So I live and try to just do good things in my life. And not think so much about it. Otherwise, then when I see it, I have to. When I see it in the news or something. That's it.
I think for me that raises a question, and I don't want to say much more than the question that comes up for me when I listen to Lars is because I've experienced that sort of a deep feeling of sadness, especially after reading Kim's blog. I mean, it's almost like that for me, reading that, just it's your fault, Kim. I read that and it was almost like I just got even more present to what's going on, and I just felt really sad. But at the same time, I also feel really hopeful, which is really nice. And I think these conversations are so important. And when I listen to Lars, the thing that comes to mind for me in terms of the topic beyond burnout, and in terms of, I think, where our hearts are with light on the horizon and what we're each trying to sort of do in our own way, is a reflection on how do we think about the hard stuff. You know, I don't want to not think about it because it's too hard to think about, right? So there's something for me about how can we hold a space to think about things that are really hard to think about, and at the same time take care of ourselves and each other and the planet. And I'm okay, I know I'm crying, but it just feels like something is moving at the moment for me. I don't know what it is, but maybe just getting more present to partly the futility of the small stuff. This is not the small stuff that's going to get this done. An accumulation of small stuff maybe, but it just feels like it's just needs a far bigger global shift. And I tried to express this in a Facebook post recently. So I'm keen to be in that inquiry for myself and to be able to hold that space for other people. I know I said I wasn't going to speak, and then I just carried on speaking. But I want to be able to think about, like, sometimes I try and talk to my partner about it, and I can see when he's starting to get really uncomfortable, he shuts the conversation down because it's just it feels too painful to think about. And understanding more about the role and the nature of thought and knowing where that feeling of pain comes from doesn't necessarily mean the pain's not there, and it doesn't change the fact that there are things that need to be resolved. And so I'm trying to just work that out, and I think Kim's moved past some of that, which is why I'm really looking forward to seeing her next week, so we can sit and talk about some of this, because I just feel like I'm just in this deeper inquiry than I was before, and it does feel really sad, because I've always been so connected to the earth and to animals and to plants, and to, anyone that knows me knows that pretty much the only thing I post on Facebook is anything to do with animals or flowers or plants. I don't have much more to say apart from that. I'm really boring when it comes to Facebook. Here's another rose, here's my dog, here's a beautiful, I appreciate the planet very much, and I also appreciate that I've taken it for granted for a big part of my life. And I just feel like I'm going through a bit of a grieving process now, and it's fine. But it just makes me feel like this is just a really important conversation. So yeah, that's my non-share.
Can you hear me over at Harley Davidson? Enormous Harley. Can you hear me?
Yeah, Dave, Laura's had her hand up for a bit. And are you?
Oh, sorry, I can't see. Sorry, look. I'll go.
Right.
I'll go.
It is a bit noisy, but maybe the Harley will go off. Yeah, and then we'll get to you. So, Laura, we'd love to hear from Laura and Chantal. I just appreciate the reality of your sharing, and just that it's something we've been going through. Okay, I'm going to mute myself.
So is this an opportunity for me to speak? Thank you. So I participated in a webinar earlier in the week with Aaron Turner. And at the end of it, Shannon Cooper, whose work I was not familiar with, asked the question about how do we accelerate the evolution of human consciousness in time to keep us from, just totally destroying our whole life support system. So I was heartened by that, because my form of activism has been more, not on the front lines, but more, I focus on language, on the English language as the software that has programmed our perceptions of reality. And I believe, and I created something called word magic. And it's about the fact that there are hidden biases in English that reflect an antiquated and manipulated vision of reality that was promulgated by the church a long time ago to manipulate human consciousness. And we're still operating out of that same mindset. So I have, through a lifetime of playing with words, discovered what I call the secret spells of the English language, and I have a viral video by that name, and also what I call sacred path words that indicate that the wisdom we are seeking is already within us, but the language that we're using requires an upgrade, and that we can collectively, creatively upgrade the English language to support our essential evolution from humankind to human kindness. And so that's the nature of my work. And I don't remember, because I'm new to the group, I don't remember which speaker, maybe Chantal, talked about the need for a spiritual foundation, that trying to address every issue. Unfortunately, there are people who are, and all of it is needed. But the ultimate form of pollution is pollution of the global sea of consciousness. And I spell that S-E-E. It's our perspective on reality that is so infected with a consciousness that was manipulated in the first place. It wasn't wisdom-based, and we can upgrade it. And that's what I show with my words and my work. And so that's essentially what I wanted to say. I feel from sharing the work as I have, I find that a simple play on words can illuminate consciousness quickly. The fact, like I have asked some children, what do you think is the relationship or the significance of the fact that the word earth and the word heart are the same word, just where you place the letter H? And one little 7-year-old said, well, maybe it means that the earth is the heart of the solar system. And a 9-year-old said, well, maybe it means the earth is the heart of our lives. So one of the taglines for my word magic work is that word magic has the power to turn youngsters into punsters and punsters into pundits. And since our whole culture, and not only our culture, but Eastern cultures as well, and nature-based cultures, begin with the premise that it all started with the word, that the word is the powerful creative force that initiates all our entire life. And so I have some wonderful quotes like Confucius. Well, let me start with, jeepers, I just misplaced it. Terence McKenna.
I want to make sure we have enough space for everyone to.
Okay. Well, Terence, I'll finish with that. Terence McKenna has said it may be the forced evolution of English that will finally bring us back to a place of becoming caretakers of the planet. And so there's a lot of background for that. So I simply wanted to introduce myself and these ideas and share them more widely. I will post a link and then you can follow up from there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's beautiful to see how people are coming to a lot of the same understandings about thought and the nature of reality and how we see things. And I'm not this race to change human consciousness. I'm sort of with Kimberly and Chantal. I've been looking at the science quite a bit. And I feel like, actually a lot of us, our consciousness is elevated enough that we would prefer not to destroy the planet. And there may be things we could do to do this. I mean, this is just Amy Chen Mills. Like, this is what's moving me now, is that to help people make the connections, because I worked for 25 years just in consciousness raising for the exact same reason that perhaps Aaron talked about, I don't know, and a lot of people in this call have talked about. And that's still super important. And the climate crisis, where we're at now, it's not a guarantee that we are going to make it. A lot of us may not. And that's sort of what it's looking like at this time. So how do we then sit with that? And I'm just wondering if there's anyone else who's feeling like Ralph. I don't think you've been on with us before, or I know Tyler's been, but we haven't heard from you in a while. And so, or Vera, would anyone like to share a little bit about the principles and what they see and how they feel, or a question about that, how that relates.
I'll speak. My name is Ruth. I'm from New York. And I just stumbled upon this webinar because it's sort of the answer to my prayers in a way. I think I've just been really dealing with something similar to what Chantal was just expressing about this sadness about what's going on, and also just feeling paralyzed in my own sort of day-to-day life, wanting to contribute more, wanting to be more active in some way, but not exactly knowing how. And so I have been hoping or looking for a conversation in which this environmental situation has intersected with the principles, which has really been such a miracle worker in my life. And so I'm really coming for hope, and also hopefully to get some insights as to how I can, I think maybe turning consciousness into action more. Because I think that more people are becoming more conscious, but they're not sure what to do either. And there's a lot of fear and panic and paralysis around it. So, so that's really why I'm here. And I'm glad I found this. And I'm unfortunately not gonna be able to make the next 2 webinars. I don't know if you're gonna be doing any more, but I would love to be, be able to be connected into this conversation, because I think it could be very healing and grounding and practically helpful. So.
And I'd love to hear from other folks too. It feels to me like we have been thrown into the complete unknown. With the principles, we've been going into business, we've been going into communities, we've been going everywhere, and it's been very successful. And yet going into ecological activism feels new to me. It may have been happening, and it probably has been happening, honestly. I probably just don't know who's been using this in ecological activism or grounded in it. And I know for me, there hasn't been a concrete solution as much as I'm on a journey. Like I see Chantal crying, and I've been there. I've been concerned for my children and thinking maybe we should just buy a bunch of water filters, a bunch of seeds, and go up and do homesteading, which frankly a lot of people are actually doing right now. I mean, you'd be surprised how many people are making these plans right now. And so there's something about this idea of mind and connecting to wisdom that I'm just trusting. It's like I don't know what the outcome will be of anything I'm doing, whether it's Extinction Rebellion work, whether it's talking to the Wisdom Council people here in Santa Cruz, and offering that up to Extinction Rebellion as a way to promote solutions towards climate across the world, or whether it's doing gardening. I'm planting food in my garden just to see if I can do it again. I used to do it, and I'm partially good and partially a total failure. So I'm like, look, if the shit hits the fan, we're gonna die. We're going down. I can't grow food to save us all. And but there's something, again, what I keep coming back to, and this is just me, is that when I go into a quiet space, and this is very much to the topic of the webinar, I'm moved in a certain direction. And like now Extinction Rebellion here has got 50, 100 people involved with different groups and regenerative groups forming. And I love Extinction Rebellion because I'm like, I don't want to go down ignoring the fact that we're going down. That doesn't seem right to me. And let's wake up, and then we can use our wisdom to do what seems right. But that's just me. It's not going to be for everybody. And so, and now I can pull back. We're going to go camping, and that feels wise. Like, look, I just want to go I need to see some animals now. I've been reading about them all dying. I need to see some live ones and just, so I think it's like, to me, there's never been a set pattern of what I should do for my whole life, ever. It's always been like feeling my way into the next step. And I love, Kimberly, what you wrote in your blog. You were very, very busy, and then you're just like, I just need to stop for a while. And that's activism too, because that's going to the most powerful source of help available to us at this time, which is mind. If anything's going to save us or half of us or whatever we think, it's going to be mind. And the more we can connect to mind, the more we move with in our individual, unique characters, personality, ways to affect that whatever changes mind is bringing forth for us, or through us, really.
I just say really quickly that what I've been seeing more and more about is, you know, so I started off being, what can I do? How can I change this? How can I mitigate? How can I raise the consciousness of humanity? And now it's much more about, if what we believe is true about mind, then there's a very, like, mind, universal mind and Mother Earth, I'm sure, talk to each other, right? And I think there's an intelligence there. You know, maybe it's maybe this is the wake-up call to shift us to a different place of consciousness. You know, maybe that's the wisdom right there. Now, that doesn't mean don't do anything about it and just ignore it, but it's a kind of it's just another way round of, you know, we're all so used to just going along our merry little way. You know, maybe this is the huge fucking jolt that we need. So, yeah. Thank you.
And that's how dense we are. Take this. Jesus. Anyway, so Nancy, Tyler, Vera, anyone else?
Yeah, sorry. Apparently Jen said it was too noisy for us to speak. Can you hear us? Can you hear us? Hello? Oh, right, okay. I couldn't see you nodding. We've got our screen turned right down because I tried to say battery. I was waiting for somebody to say yes. Obviously, you're all muted. You know, Chantal, when I was listening to you, love, I totally get it. And like I've spoken about in these webinars, this conversation is something that from a very young age as a child was the thing that kept me awake at night and suffering and crying and just in utter turmoil and fear about the future. But I love also what you were saying, and Kimberly, what you were saying, love, about how, you know, there is nothing wrong with these feelings. There is absolutely nothing wrong with them. And in so much of my life, I am so I find that they've been really, really useful. And at the end of it, I've gained insight. I've actually found a strength. Bloody hell, the only two Harley Davidsons in the car park. The next one's going. But at the end of these struggles, at the end of these feelings gives me a greater understanding of life. Bear with me one second. I've gained a greater understanding of life, and I've gained a greater grounding in what my fears were. So I actually think it's a really beautiful thing that we have this capacity to actually face fears, and then at the end of it, we get to gain insight and we get to gain grounding, and we get to find that we are unbreakable by nature. By nature, we are totally and utterly untouchable. That has absolutely nothing to do with the feeling state. That has nothing to do with feeling fear or feeling optimistic or feeling happy. But it means that our essence is a totally unbreakable thing, which means that ultimately we can face the truth and we can deal with things as and when they arise. So Chantal, it's so beautiful, and I recognize it in me, what you're going through now. And it's not that you become complacent. It's not that you don't care at the end of it. It's just that speaking from my own personal experience, but at the end of it, it's like I have had a shift in consciousness through going to hell. And I often say some of the greatest gifts I was ever given in my life were written on Hell's Gates, where the times I've really felt like my absolute worst have been the greatest gifts of my life. And certainly when it comes to the environment, that is certainly one of them. The way I live my life and my relationship with the environment is one of very much, I love all beings and I really love to see this planet thrive. But this comes back to, do we have a total solution? Well, my answer personally is, yeah, we do. We do have a solution to this problem, but it does start with the mind. It really, really does start with the mind. Every single atrocity that's ever taken place, whether it be towards humanity or it be towards the natural world, has started with a thought. It started with an idea of self. It started with an idea that humanity is a separate entity to the natural world. It is not part of nature. And so Amy and Chantal and Jen and everybody else who's on board on with this call, and I think it was Laura, who was it? Lauren? Laurie. I was fascinated by what you were saying about language and how the church has created this duality of humanity and the natural world. And I think it's that Laurie was speaking about, that is our superpower when it comes to climate change, is this conversation. We can act from a place of a greater sense of awareness towards the environment personally, but we also have this gift to be able to share this knowledge by the word, to be able to communicate with people, and in doing so we will raise the consciousness of humanity. It can't not. And I feel like this is the absolute solution. Once people start to get in touch with the realization that this world isn't what it looks like, that they're not powerless, that every single decision that they make does have an effect on the whole. When people start to reintegrate themselves back to themselves and back into the natural world and the unification of consciousness, then that will create everything that I believe that everybody on this call is looking for, and I believe it has the power to completely change this world. But I keep coming back to this thing. It's like there's such simple things that we can do. And one of the beautiful things I remember hearing, what was it called? Russell Brand talking about it. He just said, we vote with every single penny we spend. You vote whether you agree with something or you do not agree with something. You vote to keep something alive or let it die. And it's simple things. As we start to live our lives differently, this planet has to change. The economy, the model of society that we live in at the moment, this very money-driven society that we live in at the moment, has to change in accordance. So, Laurie, I'm fascinated to hear more about your work, and I'm really looking forward, and I hope you can make it onto more of these calls.
And if you have information that you would be happy to share, we'd love it if you could email either info@freedomthinking.co.uk or put it on the Facebook page.
So, thank you.
Let's go to Vera, who had her hand up a while ago, I think. I'm trying to unmute. Somehow it's okay. Yeah, you should be unmuted.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay, cool. Well, first of all, I want to say that it's, for me, having been like really passive, looking at things.
Hang on, Vera, can you get a little closer to your computer? You're a little distant. It's a little hard to hear you.
Okay, better?
Yeah.
Better? Okay. So I'm still getting used to the technology, because like following quick enough to actually join a conversation is like the next step that I'm not quite catching up with. Anyway, for me this is a super good conversation to be part of, and I live here in an eco village, so it's kind of my daily field, you can say. And the question was like, how do I keep my balance? Well, one of the things I do every day is walk my dog out into like a bay area, and so often I find myself like getting carried away by these grief thoughts, and then call myself back thinking, actually what I can do right now is like to pour my sense of appreciation and beauty out and actually see what's there. And by that, I choose to believe I do something. You know, it's like when somebody looks at me deep in their whatever stuff, and they don't see my beauty, if you know what I mean. And so that's one of the things that everybody who's spoken. I sat through a whole conference with like.
Oh, can people hear her? We're having a hard time with the sound right now, Vera.
Is it better? Is it better?
Yeah, yeah.
I might have had my hand on the microphone. So I've been in a big conference about climate change and consciousness just in April with Jonathan Porritt and Charles Eisenstein and so on and so on, and a lot of indigenous people. And at the end of the week, there was a lot of head scratching and like where to put our goodwill and how to pool our knowledge. So I guess, you know, we're just needing to acknowledge that we're in the same boat here and kind of. So that's one thought that I have. And another thing that gives me real hope when I need it is like, I've heard a quote of Dalai Lama once, which was in like as part of a speech where he said, never have there been more people on this planet who have actively cared for the planet and loved it. And that's really beautiful, I think. So that's also there, you know, the carelessness is one thing, but actually we are also shifting to a new paradigm where we see the earth as a being, and there's more of us every day who do that in little ways or big ways, but I think that's the single most biggest way, and I think that's where the principles are so really, really helpful for me. Good.
Thank you, Vera. That's really beautiful. That one thing that you said just struck me, and I think that this is something that Dave and Jenny will be talking about quite a bit on the last of this particular series, and we'd like to go on. I think we're just seeing how much energy there is for going on. I mean, I would like to, because I find it very nourishing to be on these webinars, and maybe more XR people will be joining on, or deep adaptation people, as we go forward. But you said something about when we love nature, you know, when we can get past our cluttered thoughts in our minds and just get present and really love and be grateful for nature. You said, it's like when someone sees me and they appreciate me, I can tell the difference sort of between when they're all caught up in their heads and when they can love me and appreciate me. And then I thought, when you said that, I thought, and what does that do for me when someone is seeing me and appreciating me with love? I thought, well, it brings out the best in me. And then I had the thought, and this is speaking to what Dave, I think, really likes to talk about quite a bit, what does that do to nature? Is there some energy that if we're all connected and we're just loving what is still, much has been lost and much is still here? You know, whether we act on that by protecting or planting or stewarding nature, or if we're just in that appreciation. I don't know. That seems a bit metaphysical and mysterious, but I just had that thought, like perhaps that is an energy and a power of some kind. So anyway, I just wanted to jump in with that, and then
yeah, I think it is a beautiful thing to point out, Vera, what you just pointed out. Because one of the things I like to do with people is I like to show them something. Like when people come to us with a problem, I like to just show them something. I'll be like, so tell me about this. Were you thinking about these beforehand? And they'll be like, no, 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 tell me about them. Well, the glasses, they're made out of plastic. They've got tortoiseshell looking on the front. They're green, Ted Baker written down them. And I'll pass them something else, say a phone or something. And were you thinking about this before? No, no, it wasn't. And then I'll ask them to tell me about it, and they'll say, well, it's a Samsung. It's got a black screen at the moment. It's made of plastic. It's got a camera on the back. They'll talk about it. And it's a really beautiful thing to start to notice that where our attention goes, our mind brings us information. It's one of the most mind-blowing things. Wherever our attention goes, our mind will think about it. And for so much of my time, I did focus on everything that was negative in this world. When I got eyes for the negative, when I got eyes for the death and destruction, that's all I could see. That was a time leading up to before I came across the principles. And I remember the world being the most hostile, disgusting place. Human beings were a cancer. That was my view of humanity. It was a cancer. I don't understand why nature even brought us into existence. Look at the state of us. We are the most vile, disgusting creature that just does not give a shit about anything else other than itself. And then when I got to gain insight into what the principles are pointing to, I realized that humanity is actually a beautiful, 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 beautiful being. That it is a phenomenal creature. It has these capacities for love and caring and understanding, and it really does give a shit about each other in certain aspects. In other aspects, we don't give a shit about each other. But one thing that really struck me was just this fact that humanity is so lost. And I remember for the first time in my life, I actually fell in love with myself at this point of waking up to what the principles. I hated myself. I utterly loathed myself. I used to describe myself, forgive me if I forgot to talk about this, but I actually described myself as the scariest man I'd ever met in my life, and I couldn't leave me alone. But this moment of realizing this connection to life, this deep connection to life beyond Dave, but this connection that's totally and utterly impersonal. It has got nothing to do with how I perceive the world. It is a fact. But when I got in connection with this, I fell in love with myself. And in falling in love with myself, I fell in love with life, and I fell in love with this planet. And it was from that place, I mean, I've always loved the planet, I've always loved the environment and nature and stuff, but it was from that place of connection where it all suddenly made sense. And it was from that place where I feel like real insight is born and where real connection is born. And I genuinely feel that if we really are going to change this planet, forgive me for repeating myself, but this is the point I keep on coming back to. If we are going to change this planet, we have to reconnect ourselves with the planet. It's like when we're driving down the road and we see all the dead animals that people have just run over. I often say to Jenny, what if those were people? What if those were human beings? What would our behavior like? It's this disconnection. It's simply, that's all the problem is. And ultimately, the problem's a very simple one to solve. You know, ultimately, the problem is not necessarily simple to solve, because that means we'd have to speak to an awful lot of people and hope that they gain insight into it. But the problem itself is very simple. There is this problem of ego and separation, and this idea of a separate self that ultimately creates this winner and loser in life. We live in a win and lose society. We live in a dog-eat-dog society. We live in a competition society, and this is absolutely opposed to the law of nature, which is one of just pure cooperation. The rest of the natural world cooperates with itself, with one another, whether that be insects pollinating, whether that be things like alder and stuff like that, fixating nitrates into the soil, and so other plants and animals can thrive. The rest of the natural world is a one of cooperation, yet humanity is one of competition. It's completely polar opposite to the natural order of life. Yet it is the natural order of life because it's taken form. But I really feel like this issue the problems that the world faces can easily be solved as people start to reconnect. And it is, and I'm sorry for repeating myself, but it is a 100% solution in my mind. When people reconnect, they will think different, they will act different. And from that place, this world has to change. So again, forgive me for repeating myself.
I love that. And the thing that I really heard as well, listening to Vera, which really struck me, was the truth of oneness. You know, that we are all made of energy that brings us into form in different ways. You know, that the outward expression of nature is different forms: the human form, the plant life form, the galaxy. You know, there's different forms, but you know, as I often say to my friends, well, we're all space dust. You know, we're all space dust. And so if that's true, then to see the interdependence, but the absolute oneness and connection of all things, means that, of course, where energy flows, there's going to be some impact. It has to be. It's necessary if we are all made of the same stuff. If there really is no absolute separation, then by inference, there is always going to be impact in wherever our energy goes, and what that means for the actions that we might take based on how we think, which is what our conversations are about in terms of the principles, is understanding that our state of consciousness, our state of consciousness, our inner world, is creating our outer world. And so if we want to look at the state of the world, we have to look at the state of consciousness as the origins of that. It doesn't make sense to me to look anywhere else in terms of trying to try and fix this. You know, we made the mess and now we're desperately trying to clean it up, or not, as the case may be. So once again, I'm just grateful to be in this conversation, and hopeful that that if I can wake up, anyone can. The one that needed 1 million pairs of shoes, if I can wake up, then anyone can. You know, we just need so much less than we think we need. And the consumerist kind of, I had a friend, Giles, who used to come around and he'd spot something new that I'd bought and he'd say, oh, another thing you bought to throw away next month. And I used to sort of laugh and say, don't be silly. And but actually he was pointing to something so important that I just didn't have the level of consciousness to even hear at the time. But anyway, thanks, Charles. Maybe you'll be on the call one of these days. He's got a solar business, so he's right in the heart of this conversation in his own way.
And I think Charles is an awesome man, and I think it's quite a beautiful thing, because you realise people are onto this. You know, it feels, you can feel like a singular fish in an enormous ocean of people who don't give a shit. But I don't think that's the case. I think there's a certain amount of people that don't give a shit, certainly, but I think an awful lot of people do care more than we could possibly ever know. We just don't get to speak to them or meet them. So, good on Charles.
Well, we end at 1/2 the hour, and we don't have to go that long, so we'll just see if anyone has anything else they'd like to say, or a question or a thought or something that didn't get addressed that we would be good to address.
Amy, do you think we need to speak any more to the core topic? Do you feel like you want to share anything in relation to the title of the webinar? I mean, I don't have any strong feeling either way, but I'm just wondering
I think Mahima said when she saw the topic, she actually had something else to say. So I don't know, Mahima, if you wanted to share what you were going to say.
Can you guys hear me? Okay. So grateful for you reminding me what the topic was, because I came in such a rush. I just managed to find the link in time to log in. So I hadn't actually looked at the full details of the call. But I mean, this whole conversation today has been kind of a reminder for me of where I was maybe 2 years ago. It wasn't to do with the environment at all. It was social. You know, at the time we were looking at things with child trafficking related interventions here. And there was a lot of work and a lot of good stuff and all of that. And at some point, this huge just despair of thinking, what's the bloody point? You know, there's always going to be people who's going to do bad shit to other people. And my target is to keep going, and one day people will stop doing junky stuff to each other. It's like a lost cause. I mean, it's just not going to happen. Certainly not going to happen in my lifetime, and probably never. And this whole sort of the weight of what we do to each other, you know, as people, that just really. And actually, I think Dave and Jen were visiting here in Kathmandu, somewhere in the middle of that. And it was just a really kind of just a despair in realizing the scale of the thing that I was trying to do. And then at some point, this big realization that all this while I had this thought, like coming back to the principles, right, and how practical they have been for me. This realization that somewhere I was carrying this thought, this idea that I'm doing all this, so at some point it'll be better. Right, but that I had this made up end game in mind, that like that's when I know it's done, and I've done what I set out to do, and that there was this kind of optimism and hope and all of that tied up to that, and the despair was tied up to that, you know, to this needing this closure of knowing the thing happened the way that I had in my head I wanted it to happen, and that all of this depth of despair was tied to that. And it really, in a way, had nothing to do with where I was at the moment or the state of things as it was in that aspect. It just was this idea I carried with me. And at some point, coming to realize I actually didn't need that. I didn't need this sense of hope or optimism. No, it was just something I wanted to do, and I just got on with it. And it took this huge weight off of me to see that. But also it prompted a real depth of looking kind of fearlessly at what's here, right? And if I didn't need the hit of like, I'm making the dent, what's here? And what is a way that me, like one person with relatively little background in it, can see with some depth, something of complexity. How is it that I can dialogue with people who disagree about how important this is, or whether this is where they should spend their money or their time, or whether it's how wrong it is in the context of other things? It just took all of this judgment of the table, of needing anybody to be different, for me to do what I was doing. And I think it really, from an engagement standpoint, really shifted the ground from which I was engaging. And the quality and the tonality of dialogue with people who, you know, there's a very diverse range of people that have to liaise together in projects like that, and a lot of strong opinions. And it really changed the quality of our dialogue. And I realized how judgmental I had been too, you know, like under the conviction of being somebody who saw with some accuracy and completely discounted the fact that I'm seeing my thinking too. You know, it's not just them who are all caught up in their thinking, but me too. And this huge amount of, I don't know, newfound appreciation for them, a huge boost in the quality of our collaboration. in not needing them to be any different, not needing the situation to be any different. You know, there was this huge like freedom, and this also a sense of confidence that, you know, that one person really just does have the innate capacity to see deeply into something they want to see, with honesty and with openness. And it really, I mean, it changed the way that I think I saw myself and I saw activism and engagement. So that's something I wanted to share as not related to environment, but related to, you know, the quality of our engagement and resilience, right? Where does that come from? And for me, the thought and mind, you know, becoming more and more aware of that at play in the way that I see issues, whether that's social or environmental or political, that has really been a big deal over the last couple of years for me. Is that Tyler that has his hand up?
Yeah, Tyler. So beautiful, Mahima. What a deep, an incredibly deep insight, really, just so profound. Okay, Tyler, you.
Hey everyone. Yeah, I wasn't really intending to say anything, but what you said actually reminded me of a conversation I was having last night with a nice young woman who is interested in filming, and she's interested in this, you know, this problem that we're coming up against, and very upset at, well, you know, implicitly upset at the way that our individual ways of approaching this issue don't ever seem like enough, especially that we often feel like we're kind of going backwards sometimes. Someone, you know, uses a car or uses a piece of plastic that is single use or something like that. I mean, I'm imagining that most people here have not totally unenvironmentally damaged their life, or possibly damage-proofed their environmental lives. So it kind of, I don't know, I was looking for something to say, and what came to me was, you know, our individual actions, they're really important. How we affect the world as just, you know, us is really, it matters. It'll always matter. But also how we do things socially, and what part we are of this larger social response is going to matter 100 times more, because in the ways that we interact with one another, it's, well, it's just the way you, I guess, you leverage not just your own power individually in the larger social response, but just what you also do to make up that social response. The effects kind of are like exponential, you know. It's not just like, you know, 2 or 3 or 4 individuals going at a problem. It's like it can be a whole society. So yeah, anyway, this is getting a little more muddled than I really imagined it was going to be, but still, I would say that it would be a lot of pressure off of everyone's minds to know that they don't have to do this just on their own, that this is something that we all have to do together. And the solutions become much more possible when we're working on it 100 minds behind one problem, rather than 100 minds behind 100 different individual problems. So that's what I wanted to say. Okay.
Thank you, Tyler. And Nancy had her hand up, and we might end with Nancy, which is often good. Go ahead, Nancy. We can't see you. Can you turn your video on, or are you not able to?
I'll do that. Just a second here. We're kind of running out of time, and I'm at the moment, what I normally would do here that brings my video
Nancy, I think you're muting yourself is maybe what's happening. So I'm gonna just, it's fine. Okay, there you go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyhow, when Mahima was speaking about this huge shift in her own understanding that was just so eloquently stated, and then when Tyler responded, and what was coming up for me that it would be possible for someone new to this work or coming from a different perspective, perhaps to hear what she's saying, and I do hear people doing this, as if what she was inviting us to do is to be passive, to not, to go from being very active to being very accepting. But what is really coming through for me is by shifting our thoughts, it's not that we cease to act, it's that the thoughts we have that get out of our own way, and then mind can come through us and direct the action. And that is the part of us that, in a way, Tyler was referencing, that we are all connected through our shared consciousness. And when we get the interfering thoughts out of the way, then consciousness works through us to take those actions that are most connected. Earlier, forgetting who it was saying that
Uh-oh. Nancy, are you there? We lost you. Okay, I've got to unmute her. I think she got thrown off. Unmute.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're a little garbled, but just try speaking. Oh.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this may make my voice clearer. Is that better?
Well, just keep talking.
Can you hear me?
Yes, that sounds good.
Okay. Anyhow, just the notion that we don't, when we cease to be caught up in our emotions and how things should end, acting our actions in that way, which ends up causing burnout, we don't need to act. It's that we act from mind. The more active, the more joyful, the more appreciative, the more effective we are also in the actions. We get the more connected to each other through consciousness and connected.
Nancy, I have to stop you. Nancy, can you hear? Can you hear? Because you're so garbled.
Yeah.
Okay. It sounded beautiful, though. It sounded something like the more we get out of our own personal thought systems and cluttered thinking, the more effective we actually are in whatever we're doing, because we're operating from that connected source. And so love and joy and gratitude are almost necessary, it sounds like what you're saying. So that seems really quite right to me. Maybe if you want to.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
That's exactly what I was saying. Thank you.
And what a challenge it is to, in the face of the sadness and the loss and the feedback loops and the this and the that, to find that joy and love and peace. And yet everyone on this call can do that. So that's maybe a beautiful place to leave off. And even if it doesn't feel like that's your experience in the moment, I would just say, come join us again on Friday and report back, from the week. And because, that was the message of Sid Banks. We never are not connected to mind. And the nature of mind is love. So shall we say goodbye? Shall we all unmute and say goodbye?
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Lovely seeing
Thank
you.
you, everybody.
Loads of love.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Come join us again, Mahima.
Loads of love, everyone.
Bye, guys.
See you, Chantal. See you, everyone.
See you
See you,
Tuesday.
Amy.
Bye.
Bye. Bye, guys. All right, I'm going to click end. Ciao. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.